A Lenten hazard for sure.
Good evening. Welcome to the Orange County Historical Society. Thank you for all coming tonight. Few items to begin with here. First of all, if everybody would mute their phones for the evening if you haven't already, that's appreciated. Also, want to mention if your membership is due or you would like to become a member, you're more than welcome to take care of that tonight. Either Lynn over there at the front table has our newsletter, which has forms, membership forms in, and you can pay there, or back here at our book table, they can also take your forms back there and payment. Also, of course, we have a nice selection of books back there, including we've got some Civil War memoirs back there as well, which we have not had out and available before. Oh, I see somebody already bought one. So we may have some more of those at the next meeting too. So we have more copies of that available. So I'll just mention again, I brought this up at the last meeting, but after many years at the Heritage Museum of Orange County, where we've had our archives and office and our library, we're now looking for a new home. They're looking to use that space for other things. So we're looking for a place that has at least 1,000 square feet, HVAC, adequate parking, weekend access, strong floors, because we've got a lot of heavy stuff, and of course, low rent. In Orange County, somehow magically. In a perfect world, it would be centrally located, not out at the far edges of the county, as much as we love San Clemente and La Habra. Not everybody wants to drive there on a daily or weekly basis. And have relatively good freeway access. We are not opposed to sharing space with another organization. So if you have suggestions or available space, talk to me or one of our other board members after the meeting, or give us a call. As far as upcoming programs, next month, May 8th, some loser named Chris Jepson will be speaking. About it's a story of nominally it's a story of a shootout in the streets of San Juan by the Sea, which is now part of what's Capistrano Beach, Dana Point. But it's a story really about the railroad boom, the railroad towns that came and went, the last days of the Wild West and frontier justice. And some serious Old West scalawag types. So that should be a fun program, I hope, for everyone. And that's May 8th. And then on June 12th is our annual dinner, which will be held at the Alta Vista Country Club in Placentia. Historian and Disney Imagineer Christopher Merritt will speak on the subject of Designing Disneyland, the imagination of Mark Davis. The evening includes a delightful buffet dinner and our always popular silent auction. Flyers are in your latest and upcoming issues of the Courier and also available at the back table. So you'll see those up there. So again, you can sign up for that tonight too. And if you've already signed up, you should be receiving your confirmation this weekend via email. So anyway, that should be a lot of fun. I think that kind of wraps up our announcements, although I did want to mention too, I mean, obviously if you're here tonight, it means you're interested in Huntington Beach, and every so often I just like to bring up a book that I like and share it with everybody. And for a good general history of Huntington Beach, that's, you know, there are some others. I mean, there's the Ebb and Flow is good, but it's a little pamphlet. It's the introductory size sampler platter. For a little heavier tome, this is probably the best thing that's been done still. And this was done back in the 90s by Diane Marsh, who some of you knew. And so it's called Huntington Beach, Gem of the South Coast. So I would recommend that. It's out of print, so you would have to track it down online, Amazon or something like that. But it's still floating around out there, and you might consider that. We've got there's been lots of little, like, niche histories of Huntington Beach done. Things like Mary Urashima's history of Wintersburg, that area, and the community there, and there's history of the fire department, and you're working on a history of the library system, which is great. We're looking forward to that. But sometimes you just need to get in and kind of get the big picture history first to get the bigger, view. So without further ado, let me introduce our speaker. Kathie Schey is currently the archivist of the city of Huntington Beach and a practicing historian. As a lifelong resident myself, I deeply appreciate the excellent historical work she's doing in our town. Occasionally, I'll write something about Huntington Beach. And like I say, Mary Urashima was doing stuff about Wintersburg. But it's Kathie's full-time beat. And she has ably picked up where other dedicated Huntington Beach historians like Barbara Milkovich left off in the 90s. Now we just need to get her to gather up all of her work and get it published in book form, and we can make her an internationally known author.
Oh, good grief. No hope.
Kathie holds a master's degree in history, receiving the Nicholas Perkins Hardeman Prize for her work. Subsequent awards include 2 nationally competed visiting research fellowships. Kathie has served on numerous history-related boards, including ours, and holds certification in archives, historic preservation, and urban planning. With that, Kathie,
Good heavens.
take it away.
Well, thank you everyone for coming tonight and taking the time to hear me speak and learn more about my work. Really, really very pleased to be here and see a lot of faces I haven't seen in a while, so that's a very pleasant experience. I'd like to start off by explaining that I'm not a military historian. I got into this project to begin with in 2019 when we were celebrating the centennial of our American Legion Post 133. And as some of you may know, the American Legion was founded by and for American World War I veterans. What I found out, interestingly enough, was that our post 133 is actually one of the longest continuously serving posts in the United States. It's actually only 2 months younger than the American Legion itself. So in doing this, I sort of decided, well, I've got to get to the background of these men who founded it. I had the charter, I knew who they were, and so I dug into their backgrounds and their military service to find out more about what they did, what their lived experiences were. Obviously, they went and they returned, but I thought there's more stories to tell. So then I decided, who else? We must have had more World War I veterans that just weren't founding this post. And so I really started digging around and found out, yay, lo and behold, we do. And in fact, we had only slightly fewer, well over 100, slightly fewer World War I veterans, people who served from Huntington Beach, than we had the actual voters in 1909, registered voters, again, all men, who voted to create our city as a charter city. It was a city, we became a charter city years later. So I wound up, I've got to find out who they are. I've got to find out what they did. And so what I did was I thought to myself, first of all, what did people think, right? We know that the United States did not enter the war. It started, and we sort of watched from afar for a couple of years. What did we think about that? So I went to our old friend, the Santa Ana Register, and I found, lo and behold, this is Archduke Ferdinand, of course, who's widely held to have had his assassination be the kickoff for all of this. And so I look, and of course, there's about 5 columns on the front page of the Register, which was at the time the largest paper in Orange County, of course. And only 2 of them have anything to do with this assassination, right? So it wasn't the biggest thing since sliced bread. Next to it, we have another article, which just cracks me up. It's Sir Timothy Barclay, who's Britain's leading international attorney. And he said, well, it's not too bad, so what? Thank God, he was a nasty guy anyway. He was bitter, bigoted, and always aroused hatred. He also mistakenly says, basically, now that he's dead, the chances of us going to war are greatly lessened. He was wrong, right? He was wrong. But if that doesn't help us gauge how seriously we took all of this, the next column has an article about a lady who tried to drown herself in Indiana. Unfortunately, her wooden leg kept her afloat. So that really tells us something about what we think of that. So even though we didn't immediately join into the war, we stayed out of it quite a while, here in Huntington Beach, and I'm sure in other communities like ours in Orange County, we had all kinds of relief, right? We had Belgian relief, we had bond subscriptions, we had the Red Cross, we had all of these organizations that stepped up to do things, mostly humanitarian, all over the all over the community, all over the place. They also even had a home guard. And it was a bunch of men who thought, well, if somehow the Germans appear on the doorstep and we're still not at war, we can protect Huntington Beach. And they had to buy their own ammunition, but they took turns roaming around the city at night. So what happens, right, to kind of get us into the war that led us into service? And we know that we were really trying desperately to stay out of a shooting war. Being humanitarian is one thing. Actually risking our lives in another continent is quite something else. So some of the things that historians widely hold as having led to this, of course, was the sinking of the Lusitania, which happened not long after the war itself began. And what really upset everyone was that this was a passenger vessel. And when it was destroyed by a German boat and sunk, 1,200 people, nearly 1,200 people died. And these were mostly civilian individuals. And so it was considered a terrible thing. 128 of them were Americans. So one of the most atrocious images, or heart-filling, gut-wrenching images, I should say, is this poster that was extremely popular of a woman cradling her innocent baby as they sink to the bottom of the sea. That actually was interestingly published right after the Lusitania in the United States, but used in Britain because nobody was enlisting here in the United States yet. The Zimmerman telegram, closer to the time we joined the war, it was a telegram deciphered, intercepted by British intelligence that I'm sure many of you are already aware of. But basically, it was a proposition by the German government to Mexico that if the United States was to enter the war, it was to be a great benefit to Mexico if they would become German allies. And in fact, promises were made to them in that event, when Germany would win. But the crowning thing that really got everybody going was the unrestricted use of submarine warfare by Germany. And they would pop up, they'd blow up anything they could get their hands on. If you were a merchant vessel headed to Britain or any other area, boom, you were gone. And they were very indiscriminate about which things they blow up, which flags those ships sailed under, and so forth. And even though we had some diplomatic discussions with Germany, and they just wanted to step back and basically say, okay, we get it, this is too much, they nevertheless said, nuts to it, we're shooting things, we're blowing things up. Well, we have a president, Woodrow Wilson, and he takes action. What fascinates me is he'd run in 1916 for president with the campaign slogan, "He kept us out of the war." And that was a big thing, big reason why he was elected in 1916. But in 1917, in April, I think it was April the 2nd, he goes to Congress and he requests a declaration of war on Germany. And he tells them, the world must be safe for democracy. And this wonderful postcard gets issued, it's very popular, people collect it, and it has some other words on it that he said. We have no selfish ends to serve. We desire no conquest, no dominion. We seek no indemnities for ourselves. We just want the world to be safe for democracy. Hang on as I go along here. Unfortunately, once we declared war, the first thing we realized was that we were hopelessly ill-equipped. We had 133,000 standing troops, that's all. And we had virtually useless, aging, worn, obsolete artillery. So we were not in the best shape. Almost immediately, of course, we created the Selective Service, and within weeks, we had boots on the ground in France. I'm trying to control two screens, and historians can't do two things at once, as you probably know. This is an image actually that Chris found and used in the advertising brochure, and I loved it, so I stole it. And the reason I love it is here we are now in Orange County, and this is a patriotic edition of the Santa Ana Register, that same newspaper with the lady in the wooden leg, right? And they're showing out that Orange County men are found in every branch of service. And that's true. But what got me is all of these guys are well-known. They're lifelong families, been here forever. They're powerful, they're rich, they hold positions. And so they're shown there, doing their bit. And so they're very much the heroes of the situation. In reality, everybody here, with the exception of this gentleman, the second row in with the hat on the second column, that's Lou Blodgett, we'll talk more about him later. In reality, this really wasn't an accurate representation. Because what I found just looking at Huntington Beach alone, okay, is that the men who served came from all walks of life. They were well-to-do, some were educated, some were very poor, some were men of color. We had people like this one fellow, Sumner Sokols, how's that for a name, who had absolutely no friends and no kin. And so he listed as someone to contact on his military record an elderly lady who ran a local candy store. So you can imagine. I've chosen tonight to share with you just a couple of stories that I think really illustrate not only what Huntington Beach experienced, but what probably was experienced in your communities if you go back and do the same kind of investigation. And the first of these is Charles C. Warner and Edward Brankus, who joined the 319th Engineers. They, like many others, were unlikely comrades. They came from very different backgrounds, but this was not an unusual thing for people of very different backgrounds and abilities to be in the same unit. Carlos C. Warner was a Berkeley-educated mathematician and architect. He was the son of Judge Warner from Huntington Beach, so very, very important character. Edward Brankus, on the other hand, was an Austrian immigrant. He'd come here as a child, been orphaned, and he grew up at St. Catherine's Orphanage in Anaheim. A very, very different situation. Together, they got on board the HMT, old ship, HMT, His Majesty's Transport, the Britain, and they headed off to sea. They were part of a 15-ship convoy. And so they thought, well, we're pretty safe. Nothing's going to shoot at us. There's an awful lot of us that have to, shoot it and get. And so they're sailing away, which is fine. Until 3 or 4 days out, they realize the Spanish flu is also with them. This massive pandemic that destroyed millions of lives across the world. Very quickly, 200 men were affected on this voyage. And I'd like to, if you'll bear with me, sort of read a little bit from their commanding officer talked about it in his diary. The pallbearers brought the body, draped with the national colors, across the well deck, up the ladder to the poop deck, and aft between a double line of F Company men clinging to the rigging or to each other to maintain a footing. But all came to the right-hand salute as the body of their comrade passed, and remained uncovered as the chaplain Baker read the simple burial service and the soldier's body was consigned to the sea. Very difficult situation. They soon run into terrible weather, and the ships get separated. And there's roiling and moving, and they lose sight of each other. And in the situation, 2 of the ships actually rammed each other and sank, with enormous loss of American military life on both those boards. The Britain continued to limp towards Le Havre, and their same commanding officer described how miserable it really was aboard ship. Second Lieutenant Charles Burton's report focused on the 1,001 conflicting odors, the unwanted discontent among your digestive organs, and the complete inability aboard the ship to find a dry place to smoke a cigarette. He was particularly appalled at the wharf rats who greeted them on landing. He called them dirty, unkept children with innate propensity for money grabbing. In reality, of course, they were children starving and begging for food and coins. It's interesting to me that while they're there, Carlos Warner actually is writing home to his father quite a bit. And very often these letters home are published in the local newspaper because everybody wants news of what's going on in this very comparatively small town. And he writes, we're in this unit that builds barracks, which consists of pounding stakes for tents endlessly into mud, in the rain, in the slime. And he says, I don't really mind the work, Dad. I just wish I had a shot at the hellish Hun. He also later wrote to his father, look out on the newsreel of Woodrow Wilson's visit. The 319th was picked to stand at the front of the line, and you should be able to see me in the pictures. They returned together after armistice. Carlos Warner wound up being a very high-ranking insurance executive in San Francisco, surprisingly. Edward Brankus came home and took a very simple job as an auto mechanic. So despite everything they shared, there's really no reason or evidence that either man ever spoke again. Okay. The next is one of my absolute favorite stories that I found out. It's called Over the Top with a Wave Goodbye, and it's one that we are actually writing up for publication. And this involves the fact that very often you would wind up in a unit with somebody you knew, right? And so that happened a lot. Maybe you joined up with a buddy, right? That happened quite a bit. In this particular case, there's 3 young men, lifelong friends. 2 of them enlist together, 1 enlists before them, and they actually do meet up with each other. It's quite an amazing story. Albert Isner, the grandson of William T. Newland, he joins the 322nd Field Signal Battalion, Company C. It's a highly skilled battalion. They're responsible for installing telecommunications, telephone, telegraph lines, things like that, which not only served as the communications channels for the troops and the administration, but also very often served as guide ropes and guiding lines for troops that had no idea where to go. They'd follow the wire, right? Hopefully the right direction. Tom Giesler, whose nephew became one of our Huntington Beach's most celebrated mayors, Ernie Giesler, very, very lovely man. And then Harvey Studebaker, the Studebaker family, you've all seen their name around. They joined together 364th Infantry Company E. Now, Isner writes home early, and again, remember, a lot of these letters are published. He writes home that he's been on the front line for a while, but he's safe, things are fine, his parents shouldn't worry. And then he writes and he says, "You won't believe what happened. I'm there working on this equipment, and I see Tom and Harvey, and they're coming to go over the top. And I wave at them, but in all the noise, we can't hear each other, but they wave back. They waved back, they went over the top, and I have no idea what happened to them." You can imagine how the Studebaker and Giesler families took that news. And of course, the whole community was waiting with bated breath. In reality, the two men had been, after arriving by ship, which is actually an interesting ship. Let me show you the ship. That's the Olympic in her dazzle colors. They were then hiked, rode horses and mules, were carried in convoys that were trucks, loaded in railroad cars toward the front. I'd like to take a moment to talk about the ship, if I may. This is the Olympic, the sister ship of the Titanic, okay? So right away you're worried, right? And I did not know until I started this project about dazzle colors. Many of you would already know that. It turns out, evidently, that very recognizable ships of the line, like the Olympic, that could easily be picked out, spotted, and fired upon, right? They discovered that if they painted them in these silly things where they weren't symmetric at all, and you couldn't, line up gun sights, wouldn't line up. They couldn't really be targeted. And they were almost invisible unless you just had a really good aim of your own. Each recognizable ship had its own pattern so that nothing could be learned and memorized and so forth. And so this is Olympic and her dazzle colors. Unlike the Britain, with Carlos and Edward on it, they were not part of a convoy. There was no music being played. Fortunately, they also managed to land without the Spanish flu. Now, after Isner writes that he's seen these boys, they've gotten to this town, and the Meuse are gone, and they're headed, they're told to take a small town called Éclafontaine, which really didn't have a lot of strategic importance, but they had to take it. So after Albert does this, we find out, again, from commanding officers' records and diaries, what Tom and Henry and Harvey actually went through. They first saw the huge sausage observation balloons swaying in the air, marking the rear of the artillery on both sides. With more light, the skies were filled with airplanes of all sides. We passed through shell-torn villages, filed past huge guns mounted on railway cars, and battery of every caliber, sending their shells toward the enemy. Not a square foot of ground had not been plowed and torn by shell explosion. It was a wild and tiring scramble out of one shell hole into another, slipping, sliding, creeping, but keeping the telephone wire in sight at all time. Finally, what Albert didn't know was that their horrific fight to liberate Éclafontaine, men had cut their way through barbed wire, dodged sniper bullets and withering machine gun fire. There was nothing to do but lie doggo in the sunken road, shell holes and gun pits, until the American one-pounders could finally make their way to shell the town. Finally, the artillery fire ceased. A Boche airplane swung back and forth over our heads. The woods were torn and turned into an inferno by explosive shells. 5 men were killed, 2 more later died of wounds, and 8 more were injured. Among them was Tom Giesler. His family finally received a letter from him nearly a month later saying that he had been wounded in the shoulder, but was in the hospital recovering and hoped to get better. He didn't share any of this horrible story with his family, which of course very few soldiers really did. We find out about this in writings that were left after the war concluded. And he talks about he'd seen Albert, had waved at him, but they hadn't had a chance to speak. And he also said, frighteningly, "I don't know what happened to Harvey. I don't know where he is. We went over the top together. and I don't know where he is. Another entire month passes, and the family gets a letter from Tom Harvey. He says, I'm healing. I was unconscious. I've been in the hospital. They tell me it was the effects of gas. Fortunately, he didn't seem to have any lingering effects later in life of that. But I'll be coming home when I can. I've heard, that Giesler's all right, or he's in a hospital, but I don't know for sure. So the families at home all know, right, that the three young men are safe, but three of them don't really know about each other. It's really quite an interesting thing. They came home, the two boys, when they healed, pretty much right after Armistice. Albert Isner actually stayed for another year. He was part of the occupation forces in Koblenz, Germany. This is him. Can't forget when I'm moving one thing, I'm not moving this one. This is him here on the right. That's Albert Isner. This is from a really unusual scrapbook in Australia, of all places, that happened to have a bunch of collections of photos of his company at the 322nd Signal Corps. So we're very fortunate to get it. And you can see this really kind of wonderful display of the technical equipment. And I can only imagine how complex that was to learn how to do that. And here they all are, like little teeny ants. That's how many of them are in front of this massive statue to a German king, I'm not sure who. And here they are in Koblenz. They stayed for a little over another year before they came home. So he did travel from France to Germany. And one of the things I found in dealing with this is working with families and getting personal information. And this example is one of the best. There's a Lieutenant Colonel, USMC retired, Sean Giesler, and he contacts me from San Diego. And he says, I understand you're doing some World War I stuff, and I'm a genealogist, and I don't really know about some of these things. Can you tell me? He says, I have this picture, and I don't know what it means. Well, what is it? What does it say on the back? He says, I don't know why the Giesler family and the Isner family are pictured here together, all together at the Studebaker Ranch. So we know this picture was taken in 1921, that they all did come home. Thankfully, they all did reunite and lived happily ever after at Huntington Beach for years onward. Now this one is kind of tricky. I hope I can get this to work. I may need help from somebody that knows how to do this. In terms of people of color, this is Henry W. Brooks. Henry W. Brooks was the first African-American graduate of Huntington Beach High School. He graduated in 1917, and he was known as a gifted artist. And he contributed an awful lot to the school in terms of doing things like working with the yearbook and sets for stage plays and things like that. Extremely gifted. He'd pretty much grown up in Huntington Beach, even though he was actually born in North Dakota. And he would make pocket money by helping out as a lifeguard when he could. This is when he very first started doing that. And here he is. The star on his chest tells us that his bathing suit is actually rented. He didn't own his own bathing suit. He had to rent it to do this job. And he enlists and is very, very proudly assigned to the 92nd Division, 350th Machine Battalion, Company B. And if you'll bear with me, see if this will work. Okay, what am I doing wrong here, people? Tech. Okay. I can see it on the screen, it's just not.
Last person to be described as a tech, but also.
Well, I saw it on the screen, and it's not there now, so it should be there with an arrow. Back from that picture.
Oh, back one?
Yeah. Okay, see on the right, that picture?
Oh, okay.
Oh no, my wonderful film clip. I was so proud of this. I figured out how to embed a film clip. We're not there yet. Okay, well, I think something has gone awry.
Maybe exit out of presentation.
I never find it again.
Oh, is it also there is a separate file on the flash drive?
No, it's embedded in the PowerPoint.
Yeah, I don't know how to get.
Well, I will tell you what you missed. It's the National Archives film of the 92nd, his company. And what's really significant about it is it shows them disembarking, walking through the streets of France. And it later shows them hiking through the dirt roads. It shows them in the foxholes. And what's fascinating about all of this is they're not carrying shovels, they're carrying guns and machine guns. And the thing that's really important to know about this is that this is one of the very few units filled with black people, still segregated soldiers, who were allowed to carry weapons. Their role was not to fetch and carry and dig holes. Their role was to fight. And the concluding episode of this film shows them basically running across no man's land with their guns. They were very, very proud of their service. They had names like the Harlem Hellcats, Buffalo Soldiers, all sorts of things, and extremely proud of that. He did survive the war and came back, wound up being a house painter originally, but he did later then gain some success as an artist and wound up painting a whole lot of the detailed trim at the Grauman's Chinese Theater. So if you're there and you see all this interesting gold leaf way up high, chances are it was his work. Service beyond armistice. There are guys who stayed in, right? Or they went back. One of them was Dr. J.E. McKillop. He was one of several doctors in Huntington Beach and environs. He was actually a surgeon. His father-in-law owned the Alpha Beta, which always comes up in everything you read about him, so it must have been important at the time. And he signed up in a sanitary unit as soon as he could to help treat the wounded. And he was very good at his job. He quickly rose to the rank of major. Finally, after the war, he stayed in and was put in charge of the Army Hospital in San Francisco. Later on, he was transferred and put in charge of the Army Hospital in Los Angeles. Very sadly, in 1932, he's swimming off the coast of Santa Monica and drowns. So that's unfortunate that we lost him so early. Ralph Mellett is another case altogether. He was the editor of the high school yearbook, The Cauldron, 1917, the same year Harry Brooks worked on that same book. He enlisted as a submariner, which was quite the thing of daring do. It was a very frightening thing at the time. Frankly, I'm claustrophobic. I would be terrified to be a submariner today. He trained at Long Beach and set out to sea, survived without incident, got out of the military, proved to be a really, really gifted baseball player. And he winds up being asked to join this, I don't know what you call it, demonstration team or something, that's going to go around and challenge people. And he does, and he winds up with this American team, mostly combined of ex-soldiers, and they wind up playing exhibition games in Japan and China, okay? And he comes back from that, lives a bit here in Huntington Beach for a good number of years, decides he's going to move his family to LA, and he does that. The Second World War breaks out. He re-enlists. Not as a submariner, but he re-enlists. And he stays in that for the duration as well. So he's a two-time veteran. He actually lived to be 77. So poor Dr. McKillop, but Ralph Mellett went on. So now I've talked about people that we know survived. I'd like to talk to you now about people who died. This was Cecil Huntington, Death in the Sky. No relation to any of the Huntingtons for which Huntington Beach is named. He lived there with his sister. He'd attended Berkeley, popular school, and he was really taken with aviation. He'd actually taken some aviation courses at Berkeley. I didn't know they offered them at the time, but they did. And he learned some mechanics, and he learned some navigation and whatnot. So he was only too excited to join this group of pilots. And what they really were they were signal pilots. They'd go over there, and they were given a rickety SPAD. I'm not sure there was any plane at the time that wouldn't have been described as rickety, but they were very rickety. And they were given a camera, they were given a radio, and they would go up and they'd fly over the enemy. And they'd say, okay, where are you now? Which way are they headed? And they'd take pictures or they'd call down and say, well, they're coming over the hill or they're running away. And these were a signal corps. Amazingly enough, his death came because of a faulty signal. He received signals from the ground that were incompatible, and he plowed headfirst in one other plane and died instantly. The saddest thing about this poor young man is he dies in 1918, but his body doesn't come home until 1920, when his remains are shipped home on the USS Pocahontas. It's a very macabre voyage, because the only passengers were the remains of 839 US servicemen.
I have a question for you.
Yes?
Where's he buried at? I've never been able to locate him.
Cecil Huntington? From what I understand, the family buried him at a family plot somewhere. He's not in a military cemetery. Not that I could find.
He just kind of disappeared after that article.
Yeah, if you want to give me your name, I'll tell you what I find out. Because if you want to let me know how to contact you, I keep looking. I've never given up on any of these guys. It's like pulling a sweater apart. But he's a really interesting guy. How do you know him?
'cause I researched World War I veterans here in Orange County.
Okay,
I looked at the graves.
this is awesome. Okay, good. You can correct me.
Just look it up on Find a Grave.
Yeah,
He's not on there.
yeah, he's not. We checked that a lot, and in fact, that's the only photo I had for Carlos Warner, unfortunately, was a Find a Grave photo of his tombstone at the Veterans Cemetery. And I thought, that's not cool. I can't put that up there for Carlos, so I didn't. But yeah, Find a Grave is a common one we look at all the time. Talk about death by disease. And of course, here we go. This is the death of Carlos E. Rigdon. He was a photographer. He had a little teeny photo shop where he would take your picture or sell you photo gear, a tiny little sliver of a store on Main Street, not long after this photo was taken. He joined the Army expecting to be sent into the photo unit and be put to work taking pictures from whatever angle they needed pictures taken, and instead he gets packed off to administer ordnance, okay, in Washington, D.C. Boring. It's not what he planned to do at all. Unfortunately, he contracts Spanish influenza, and he perishes. That's the end of him. What happens, though, that's really, really sad to me, is that there were not enough military members to spare to even escort his casket to the train. His parents wanted him sent back to a little town in Indiana where he'd actually been born to be buried there. And there were not enough military people to even escort the casket. So what happened is a bunch of other people that worked in and around the area, who just also happened to be from Indiana, said they'd go. And they went with his casket and put it on this lonely train ride back to Moulton, Indiana. So that's what happened to Carlos. And interestingly, had he stayed in Huntington Beach, he probably would not have contracted Spanish flu. We have very little evidence the Spanish flu was at all in Huntington Beach. We have other diseases that were rampant, including scarlet fever and things like that, but the Spanish flu largely did not affect Huntington Beach, which is kind of an interesting story in itself. The third, we have lingering death from poison gas. The use of this gas became really the norm. It came to light during the First World War, and we really didn't understand it. Some people, like Studebaker, recovered with no ill effects. Other people who had maybe had more exposure to a higher concentration or some such did in fact suffer. The two young men here who perished were really, really sad. Sad losses. Forrest B. Turner was kind of the child wonder kind at Huntington Beach High School. Before he even graduated, he filed for and received a number of patents. This is a patent he received in 1914, okay, for a telegraph key, his specific telegraph device. John B. French was really well known in the Huntington Beach community because his father was on our first board of trustees. The sad thing about him, he was our town paper boy. So you can imagine, he comes back a shell of himself. Both these boys, well known to the entire community, and neither one of them lived longer than a year and a half. The effects of the disease were just too terrible. I also think it's important to not just look at the lives of the people that served or the ones who died, but looking at the ways they were remembered. I think that says a lot about the community and the qualities and the traits of service that were most respected and most known. This is the Golden Scrolls. I've said it was the Orange County War Relief Association, I think it was. And they tried to maintain a list of the fallen. And Blodgett, again, we'll get back to him, the guy from the SAR page, and talked about him some more. He puts an ad saying, "I've received the Golden Scrolls. They're coming. We're going to give these to the families of the fallen." And no less personage himself than Governor William D. Stevens shows up, and he's got a golden trowel, and he lays a copy of these scrolls in a cornerstone at Orange Park. Okay? And is attended by all kinds of people, and they give out all kinds of these things, including badges. I don't know what that means, but each family got a badge. So we've met most of these guys, right? Carlos Rigdon, the photographer who died of Spanish influenza. Harry Smith and Frank Robinson are both men that never made it out of the United States because they died of things like, one died of pleurisy and I think the other pneumonia, not related to the Spanish flu. They left poor Cecil Huntington off the Golden Scrolls list entirely. He was just omitted. And then, of course, they didn't at the time know about the two young men that were going to die, Turner and French. But that top guy, Joseph L. Rodman, is really worth talking about. He was an engineer for the Pacific Electric Railroad, very gifted, very well liked. He actually wrote children's stories at one point. And in he went to go become an engineer, which the military needed in France. While he was in France, he was severely wounded, and he actually, for his heroism, was awarded the French Croix de Guerre. very unique in our community and, of course, in many communities. But he was injured very badly, shipped back stateside to a New York hospital, as it happened, where he started to rally, but then declined, rallied, and then declined. And finally, it was announced he had died of horrible wounds sustained on the battlefield of France. The people that were there to pick up his sacred scroll and the badge was his young wife and 3-year-old daughter. So that brings me back to the beginning, post 133, and where we started all this here. This guy again in the hat, that's Louis Blodgett. He was Huntington Beach city attorney at the time. We've had quite a laundry list of very interesting city attorneys in Huntington Beach, and he was certainly one of them. He actually wound up being fired eventually because he refused to do, I'm kind of on his side with this, he refused to do pro bono work for council members. He was fine doing the work as a city attorney for the city, but not the private stuff of other people. So they fired him and he went to Santa Ana, but not before he became the founding president of our American Legion Post. This is a part of the charter that we had, and you'll notice there's some names there that you probably would understand or at least sound familiar. Tarbox is there, Gallienne is there. We have, of course, our friend Elbert Isner is also there. And they founded the Post. And they decided they would name it after Joseph L. Rodman, the Croix de Guerre recipient who had been wounded horribly in the battlefields of France. It flourished. One of the main principles of the American Legion, when it was first established in France, by American soldiers in France, was that this was an experience that only someone who shared it could ever understand. No one who had not been in the military in the Great War could understand how different it was from any other experience you could have. No other veteran prior to this could understand it, and they knew they were the only ones who could that. They really felt that by sharing their knowledge and working together, they could make the whole world a better place. They wanted to fill needs that they found soldiers had. They realized that an awful lot of the soldiers could not read in English, let alone their native language. They couldn't follow maps. They couldn't read orders. So they wanted to make sure that never happened again. They wanted to strengthen that. But they also wanted to build an organization that would support the needs of other World War I vets, regardless of what those needs may be. And so they worked together. They were joined by a female auxiliary in 1931. And this picture here is of the daughters of the Post. They're in crepe paper poppy costumes. And they're going up and down the streets, the main street, in these costumes, selling poppies. And in one day, in 1931, okay, not a happy time economically, they made $60. Okay, which was pretty staggering. There's one little girl picking her nose, but you have to look quick, so we'll just move on. Memorial Hall. This is a big thing in our city. It was built, started in 29, finished in 31, and it was intended to be a memorial building to honor the service of all the World War I veterans. And in fact, the World War I veterans were given full use of the entire second floor. Over time, the building became used for other things as well, including for a while city council meetings. We're in the lower theater level, which is sort of an interesting thing. But what really fascinates me about this structure is behind it is the actual memorial itself. And the memorial, if you look at this on the right here, you can see it's a concrete affair, right? With big pillars, and it's on a raised dais with sidewalks approaching it. This is not something that's meant to be walked around. It's meant to be held in a sacred place in your heart, right? It's very much altar-like, and it has meaning. After the Second World War, the VFW was formed, and they want to make sure they're included, so they add this metal square plinth on the top of it that says, and us too, basically, right? World War II as well. In 1975, they tear down Memorial Hall. And they say, well, we've got to save the memorial. So they load it up and they haul it over, and they give it a much less auspicious location at the new City Hall. This is right in the main area. You can see it doesn't look so grand. It certainly has lost its altar-like value, right? And there it sits. People leave coins on it, like you do on gravestones. People would leave medals on it, things of that nature. But one of the really fascinating things they found is when they moved it and laid it on its side, they found that in the bottom of it was a time capsule, a World War I era time capsule. They opened it on the floor of council, and I have film footage of them doing this. Unfortunately, everything in it was so degraded and soggy, there was nothing they could learn from it or anything else. They did, however, realized that when a new memorial went in, it had to have a time capsule. And in this case, it became a very scholarly affair. They worked with the state archivists, the state librarians to find out how to protect items, what kinds of items would survive in a time capsule. And we've lost the list of what actually was in it, but I have pictures of people working with the things that were going in. So I know there were POW MIA bracelets were a big hit, things like that, medals, souvenirs of the city also went in that. It's really fascinating to me too, because this guy, Rob Kakuk, was a World War I veteran in Orange County. He was really one responsible for getting communities to fly the POW MIA flag, as well as the American flag and the state flag, which of course is very common. And I didn't know this about him, but he went to our city and he's the one that got that going. He also decided to take the lead, justifiably, I don't think anybody else would pick it up, to get information about what names should be on this memorial. And he wrote letters like the one you see on the left, please help. Was this guy right? Is this guy right? Is this guy right? And of course, there they are. Originally, when the names were inscribed, they would have pluses or triangles if we knew if they were accounted for, or if we didn't know what had happened to them, they were just gone. Later, we researched it, and we now know every single name on that memorial and what happened to them. And we've also, we're going to be announcing soon, so I won't share much about it. We have 3 more names from World War I that need to be added. So we're going to be moving forward with that at the city. The last thing I want to share with you is I hope that you will consider doing research of your own, for your own community, if you haven't already. And if you have come across sources or techniques or ideas, please share them with me, because I'm not a military historian, but I really am just determined to get to the bottom of these people. But one thing you need to understand is in 1973 there was a fire in the National Archives, and it destroyed most of the records. The things there are some that remain, but a great deal of them were completely destroyed. And today, Navy and any kind of Air Corps records are particularly elusive. You won't find very many of those things at all. What survived the fire has been scanned, primarily. It includes things like draft registrations, transport registers. So it's like, here's a boat, here's everybody who's on the boat, that kind of thing. And those have been digitized by Full3. Anybody here that's really into genealogy will recognize that. This is a subscription database, but it's incredibly valuable, as is Ancestry.com. Other sources that I used and have just been so valuable to me were newspaper articles. Again, the letters are published there, right? If someone perished, they might write about it in that newspaper, okay? Things like that. People that went to war and returned, but not to Huntington Beach, might be in the newspaper. It's tedious, but it's valuable. There are regimental histories. Regimental histories are phenomenal because they tend to have been written immediately on the return of a commanding officer or whoever was involved. And they are very, very big on listing every single name that was in that regiment. So you can go in there and, the other day I found 2 new guys. They're in a newly discovered regimental history. They were written long ago, but I don't know where they all are, and occasionally they're digitized. Unit reports, same thing. Diaries, you'd be surprised how many diaries there are out there. The caveat with diaries is sometimes they were published by the family after the diarist's death, and so there are things that have been blacked out, redacted, because I think either it doesn't reflect well on the service member or the family or something like that. The guy talking about climbing through foxholes is one thing, talking about the gartered lady in Versailles that he spent time with, probably not so much. So the family does have a tendency to redact things. Again, local and international archives. You want to look at local archives if you're doing local research, but like the album I found for Albert Isser, that's another country. Okay, that was just happenstance. And then of course, like the photograph I received from Lieutenant Colonel Giesler of the family, don't hesitate to reach out to families about their resources and let them know what you're doing, if in fact you can connect with them and you know who they are. In Huntington Beach, we're somewhat lucky because we have families that have been in the city since the very early founding of the city, and many are still there and they have information to share. So with that, unless someone has questions, which hopefully I can answer, thank you so much for your time. Yes, ma'am.
National Archives, are you talking about in Washington?
Yes. Yeah. That's one of those things where I just pull my hair out every day. That wasn't all that was lost in the fire, but a lot of World War II stuff did too. And I've been trying to do things on my grandfather and my father-in-law. My grandfather was British, and I'm originally Canadian. I'm American by choice. So, who else? Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if there was an area where they had a boot camp for these brand new
They did. There were a number of them, and it kind of depended on where you were going to ultimately get sent, where they would send you. So there were, oh my gosh, there were camps all over. There were camps in D.C., there were camps in Washington State, there were camps in California, there were camps all over the place. The one, for instance, that Ralph Mellett went to, he went through a basic training boot thing, actually in Long Beach. And that was for people that were going to be eventually, hopefully, be reassigned to the Submariner Corps. But these were distributed all over the place. Louis Blodgett, the guy I keep kind of bringing up, the city attorney who founded the thing, he actually was in boot camp forever. And he was so excited that he finally got assigned to a transport. Gets on the transport gets all the way to Le Havre, armistice has been signed, they turn right around, and nobody gets off the boat. So he's a great one to be leading these veterans, right, that have seen battle and all of this stuff. So he's kind of an interesting guy, and that's not unusual. It's also not unusual, speaking of these harbors, for soldiers to return, in fact this was true of Giesler, to the port their father or grandfather had left from when they immigrated to the US decades prior. And he actually went into, I've forgotten which one, it might have been Le Havre, where his own father had left to come to the United States so many years before. Talk about a bittersweet moment, right? You're back there to fight a war. So, wow. Yeah?
Any camps here in Orange County?
I'm sorry?
Any training camps here in Orange County?
I'm not aware of any, are you aware of any permanent camps in Orange County? No. Yeah, the big thing I'm aware of in Orange County is actually World War II, and that was the Santa Ana Army Air Base, because that was training. I mean, we had virtually, I forget what percentage of our soldiers actually passed through there. And foreign soldiers, allies too, as well, going through there. Yeah?
My other question is, have you been to Post 133 and talked to those legionnaires?
I actually am the one the city asked to write their history. So I've worked with them forever and ever, to the point where when we lose someone, they usually trot me out to tell the story of that particular veteran. We recently lost, a couple of years ago actually, one of our veterans, and I just love him. He's everybody's favorite vet, but he actually was captured and escaped from he was captured by the Germans behind enemy lines. He escaped within 3 hours and took 3 other guys with him. So, I mean, we have these wonderful stories that just come up. When you get talking to veterans, and I'm sure many of you in this room are veterans, the stories that unfold are just an honor to hear, absolutely. Unfortunately, World War I guys, not so much. I wish I could talk to them. Yeah?
Have you tried the network function on Ancestry where you could put in this guy and his regiment and find all the other people in the regiment?
Yeah, we've done that to some extent.
Does it work?
The thing is, for a lot of these guys, if I know their regiment, I have other sources to document their whereabouts. So I look at maps and atlases all the time to sort of discern relationships, but not necessarily for that purpose. One of the things I should say about maps is that when the war started, in 1914, and eventually all the nations got together and decided to declare war on Germany and each other, it was really fascinating to see the maps that were immediately produced after that, because there's this gossamer web of connections between all of these nations in Europe to all of these colonies and commonwealths they're all connected to, right? So all of a sudden, not only is France at war, but this place in Guyana is at war, here's 3 islands that are at war, because their parent country is at war. So very quickly, all of a sudden, it's like, if you put lights on this map, the world lights up. And then there's a few places that are usually marked white for neutral, and of course we see Sweden, and we see us. And one of the things that was fascinating to me is looking at a 1914 map and seeing that the museum that had archived it said, by the way, don't ever look at a 1911 map because they are so completely different, as these countries would separate and conjoin and were very recombinant. So I'm thinking, wow, who knew that things would change that quickly, but they did. One last, yes, ma'am.
When you were describing the Olympic as being a sister ship of the Titanic, am I thinking that all the soldiers that enlisted, the 109 from Huntington, got on trains and then went to New York or left at Virginia?
Yes.
Okay, so that's how the trail.
Or they went on a train to a boot camp and then from there went.
Okay, but not from the West Coast. They didn't.
No.
Leave from any ships on the West Coast.
I will have a caveat about that. We did have soldiers that served in some oddball places. We had one guy who served in Coco Solo in the Canal Zone. We had another guy who served in China. And we had another guy who served in Russia. He was an aide to Russia as an ally at the time. And he had come back from Vladivostok, so he has an interesting story. So they took kind of oddball routes, not necessarily with military transport. Yes, sir?
How many names on the Huntington Beach charter?
I forget, I think it's like 11 or 12, yeah. And some of them are a little dicey. There's a guy over there that was he sold a lot of land in Seal Beach, which at the time was kind of, on the cusp. And the only service I can find for him is that he worked as a recruiter, but he was never actually part of the military. So I think he kind of snuck in. The others I can identify, but yeah. And some of them actually moved to Huntington Beach right after the war, and they didn't serve for Huntington Beach. So some of those guys, I'm like, oh, you just showed up, because you liked it. And that was just the way that went. So, anybody else? Anybody have a relative that served in World War I? I do. Yeah, there's a lot of us, right? There's a lot of us. And of course, World War II, those men and women are leaving us daily, and that's really heartbreaking. And I see that all the time with the Legion Post. So, yes, ma'am.
Just was thinking about the diaries because they're so hard to find. Would the Library of Congress have many diaries?
Yeah, the Library of Congress has an awful lot of them. I don't know if they have all of them because I don't know what all of them is. I don't know every single one that's ever been put out there. I will say, it's kind of a myth that the Library of Congress holds everything ever published in the United States. That's not true. I mean, if they did, they'd need 5 libraries of Congress to hold all this stuff. In warehouse after warehouse. But, if I find where somebody was assigned to a regiment, I look for that regimental history right away. And I look for who their commanding officers are, and I look to see if they left diaries, letters, any sort of reports, series reports. Things like that. One thing is that you'll see or hear in other states and other areas where they had large newspapers that they would publish the casualty list, right? Because these were printed, these were given out by the government. So you had places like that you could look. But here in Orange County, we just didn't have the space for that. And as you can see by the sacred scrolls with the gold trowel and the governor, we didn't really lose that many people. I don't know, and because that's countywide. That's not Huntington Beach. That's countywide. So, we really didn't have as many deaths as I kind of would expect. But again, just for Huntington Beach, 1 guy's omitted, 2 guys aren't counted because they died right after. So if that holds true for the rest of it, the rest of the county, there probably should have been a whole lot more scrolls. So that's just a starting point. I wouldn't recommend using that as a final source for anything. So, anybody else? Yes, sir.
My grandfather, he was in the quartermaster's corps.
Oh.
And I'm sure that a lot of men went through the same thing. But he was an officer, and they moved him just to different stations on the west, kind of in the western part of the country. Like he went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona. He was at the base there, the quartermaster. But he never went overseas. And I think that was pretty typical of a lot of guys that enlisted in World War I. They never did get overseas.
Well, I think a lot of, I think depending what kind of a job you got or were given, a lot of times that's where you served. And I will tell you from the things that I've read, people that served that are proud to have served, but at the time a lot of them were mad. Because like Carlos Warner, they wanted to fight the hellish Hun, and here they are making sure that Camp Corn is getting through, right? So I mean that's a different, sort of a different take.
What's interesting about my grandfather is that he took his kids and his wife, and they moved to these different bases throughout the West.
That is interesting because we don't hear a lot about that. Normally the guy goes off and then he comes home to wherever home is and whoever's still waiting for him.
That's why my father went through the kindergarten 4 years. Because they only stayed for 4 or 5 months and then they moved to another station.
Yeah, it's the way military handles families. My great-grandfather actually served for Great Britain with the Royal Highlanders in India. And as it happens, he was able to take his wife and children, even though he was a lowly worm guy. And my sense is that she probably contributed something. I don't know if she was a laundress or a cook or whatever kinds of things, but I suspect she was allowed to go to India and live there because she was also serving the unit. Anyone else? I love the great stories, but okay. Well, thank you so very much for taking the time to listen to me and allowing me the time to share this research. And again, if any of you think of other sources or whatever, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you, and this guy can always find me, no matter how I hide.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Kathy.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Awesome
Thank
as
you.
always. So, thank you all for coming tonight. Hope to see you next month for a wild tale of the Old West, and also for our annual dinner. I hear we've already got like almost 50 people signed up, and it's this early. So,
Wow.
get in there while there's still seats to be had at the table. So. I've already been hearing about some of the silent auction prizes, so some of that sounds pretty amazing. So I know I'll be bidding, and I don't always do that. So at these sorts of events,
Got
so
everything.
should be great. So see you all next month, and do help yourself to goodies at the back. Thanks.